Hi, and welcome to our first NAIT webinar between Education Scotland and the National Autism Implementation Team, NAIT as we call ourselves. I'm Lorna Johnson, I come from a teaching background and currently I'm Education Lead with NAIT.
Hi, and I'm Marion Rutherford. I come from a speech and language therapy background and I'm currently the health lead with NAIT.
So NAIT is a Scottish Government funded team working to support practitioners who work with autistic individuals and their families across a range of issues affecting the community. One area of work we're involved in is supporting autistic learners in education settings, and that's why we're here today. This guidance that we're going to be talking to today has been developed in consultation with the autism community, including autistic people, parents of autistic individuals, professionals from health, education and third sector. It's intended to help school staff and partners apply good practice relevant to the new situation that we now all find ourselves in. So some brief admin before we start. You'll see chat at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat to introduce yourself and to share wherever you're joining from. That would be fantastic. And as well as Marion and myself, we have Rosie here providing tech support. Please raise any tech questions that you have through the chat and she'll do her very best to assist. So here's the plan for this webinar. First, we'll set the context. We'll talk a bit about why we're placing a particular focus on autistic learners. We'll share key messages to support planning and introduce you to the range of resources that NAIT and partners have developed. And importantly, we'll have a chance to listen to parent and autistic voices and to ensure that what we're doing happens in partnership. Finally, we'll take about 15 minutes at the end to respond to some questions that you might wish to ask. You'll see the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen again. We won't be answering questions during the presentation, but we will take questions from here for a Q&A at the end, and we'll try to answer as many as we possibly can. For those of you who aren't already, you can follow us on Twitter at NAIT Scotland. Today we're using the hashtag autistic learners, if anyone would like to tweet during the webinar. All resources referred to during the webinar are available on our website at thirdspace.scot/NAIT. As we're Scottish Government funded, there's no cost incurred with any of our resources. It's important to set the webinar in the context of COVID-19 and what returning at this point means, whether in an early learning and childcare setting, primary or secondary school. There has been an impact of the last few months on staff who are now working extremely hard in somewhat uncharted territory to reinvent how we work in educational settings and how we work in partnership with parents. It's recognised that approximately 25% of mainstream school population have an additional support need, and one challenge for teachers and school staff right now is how to meet the needs of all these learners. It's intended that the discussion today could inform planning for children with a range of additional support needs. As a result of the current context and for other reasons, there may be children with new additional support needs, and there'll be a range of children with a range of needs. It's important that no support that we offer is diagnosis dependent or specific. So with this in mind, it's helpful to think that good autism practice benefits all children. There's also the local area context, and staff around the country will have local policy and guidance from the local authority and from within their individual school, their senior leadership team, and this will be informed by government positions. This is your main reference point. So the NAIT advice and guidance seeks to complement this, not to replace it. Getting it right planning processes are already underway in local area planning, and procedures in place will continue to be the way to take forward child planning and transition plans. Returning to schools, however, is not a single transition. There'll be many changes and further transitions, and everything ahead will be an evolving process. We have the potential to impact on autistic learners. All of these rather have the potential to impact on autistic learners and their families, and consequently all of this planning is not a one-off and will need to be continually reviewed and updated. So we've developed a framework that's designed to highlight needs at early learning and childcare, primary and secondary stages, and these are the first of a number of documents we'll refer you to. These are listed at the end of the presentation, which will be shared on Education Scotland's site after the session, as will a recording of today's seminar. The presentation per PDF will also be available on the NAIT website. Partnership working is going to be even more important. although possibly we might have to find new ways to do this. You might be interested to know we're holding a parallel NHS Education Scotland, Education for Scotland webinar for partners. That's next Thursday on the 11th and is open to education staff who perhaps haven't made it along today as well, although it will be primarily focused on health needs or health staff needs. So this presentation is not designed as an introduction to autism. We would like to signpost you to the Autism Toolbox for further information, and the email address for that will be at the end of the presentation. To learn more about autism, we'd also recommend this book, Uniquely Human by Barry Prezant. Each learner is an individual, and we need to understand some key things about them. So, firstly, communication. Social communication differences are likely to be present in all autistic individuals who may communicate at a pre-verbal or highly articulate level. Sensory preferences. Each child may be under or overreactive to different sensory information, and adaptations can make a huge difference to day-to-day life. And then we all have thinking styles which affect how we interpret and make sense of what we experience. There's a resource on our website about cognitive theories that you might wish to look at to find out a bit more about this area. Thinking about interests and motivations, it's important to infuse learning experiences with interesting and motivating elements. These shouldn't be used as something that the child has to work towards. Good things should really just happen. Autistic people often have high levels of stress and anxiety, and by providing predictable and desirable environments, we can help to reduce this. The individual's context of family, school, and their own experiences are always important, but even more so at time when we may have even less shared context with them. And finally, developmental stage. So whatever the age of the child or young person, it's important that we match the environment, the activities, and our expectations to the child's level to make it meaningful. And we've designed our resources to consider both school stage and developmental stage. The most common reason that difficulties arise is when there's a mismatch between our expectations and the child's developmental stage. So we talk here about social partner before words, language partner having some words, and conversation partner being able to carry out that to and fro of conversation. And each of our resources would be specific to particular stages. Many of the NAIT resources refer to these three stages because we find it a helpful way to ensure we target the right support at the appropriate level.
Hi, so we're just going to pop up a poll for you to answer now. We're very excited that we have 1,000 participants, so that's us reached our limit. For any of your colleagues who haven't managed to get on, the recording will be available. So today we're going to be focusing on these 8 key messages and the related guidance and resources, and we're now going to go through these one by one. These key messages were arrived at jointly with partners from the autism community, including autistic people, parents of autistic individuals, and professionals from health, education, and third sector. This poster that you can see is available on the website to download, together with related information about each of the key messages. So our first key message is ensure adjustments are anticipatory. Taking an anticipatory approach at this time means that we need to find out about the learner's recent experiences and really try to get to know the child's strengths, needs and preferences. It's important to take time to plan and prepare before they return to school. The Equality Act 2010 requires reasonable adjustments and states that these should be anticipatory, and as we sometimes say, we shouldn't just see how it goes. Our second key message is listen to parents. Even if we don't have definitive information to share with them just now about how things are going to be, and I'm sure a lot of you are in that position where we're just not quite sure what's ahead, we can still use the time just now to listen to them, to hear about their experience and what's important to them going forward. Listening is a good way to build reassurance and trust. It won't be helpful to hear lots about what schools can't do going forward, but it might be reassuring to hear what can happen and what they can do. Every family has their unique experience, and it's really important to listen to this. After such a long time with their child or young person, the parents and carers might have a new, unique and fresh insight from engaging with them at home and trying to support their learning in this new situation. The feedback we've had from families has given a really clear message that the thing they've really valued during lockdown has been direct contact from the school, either with them or their child or both. Communicating with parents and carers in advance of the return to school will provide an additional perspective and additional insight into the family context and individual needs and preferences. On our website, you'll find forms and guidance for information sharing and a guide to homeschool communication taking account of the COVID context, together with a homework guidance, which might be useful where appropriate. Everyone's mode of communication has changed through coronavirus. It'll help to take time to find out how each family prefers to communicate. Some, because of their circumstances or preferences, might need a specific appointment for a phone call. Others may prefer written communication or, for example, email. Parents or carers will have made different decisions about the balance of time spent doing structured work or other regulating activities based on the family and child or young person circumstances, and we might be able to learn a lot from this. It's important that school staff are sensitive to parent-carer feelings and their worries, and they might be worried that they're viewed as having not done the right thing. Nobody really knows what the right thing is. They might not know what was expected of them by the school, so often reassurance is helpful. This is a quote. One parent has told us what would be helpful for teachers of her child to know, and she says, I would like her teachers to spend time understanding what's been happening while at home, how time was spent, what was worked on academically and otherwise, and to consider building it into the new school day topics, interests important or enjoyable to help her with her return. Key message 3 is provide predictability. Predictability helps to reduce anxiety, and disrupted expectations can increase anxiety. By understanding current concerns and creating the right environment, the return to school will feel more predictable. We don't have any autistic learners presenting today. However, this quote from a secondary autistic learner in a mainstream school highlights what's made homeschooling desirable and predictable for them. They say, home learning and homework, I feel like it's blended into one. I suppose because we don't do any physical work on a call, it's like talking and then you go off and do the work. When you come off the call, you need a break and you can take one. I like that because it's broken into pieces and it's quite manageable. And as always, it's just very nice to hear the voices of those affected. And key message 4 is to use visual supports. Those of you who know us will not be surprised at this one. One really easy way to introduce predictability is to use an individual visual timetable, such as the one pictured here. This is recommended for all autistic children and those with related needs. It can support predictability and desirability each day. It supports communication, transitions, and managing familiar and unfamiliar, as well as unexpected and expected events. The length and type of timetable depends on the child's stage. So obviously some will be at an object level, photo level, some can only do a now next, and some might have a longer schedule for a greater part of the day. Printable visual support resources are available on our website, as well as guides linked to visual supports relevant to each developmental stage. And I'll pass you over to Lorna now to tell you about the next key messages.
So this is the 5th key message, provide a safe space. As always, we've got full guidance about this on our website, including we have a separate guidance for safe spaces for social partners. That's quite recently gone up and maybe of interest to some of you already using safe spaces and to others. So a safe space is an area of the learning environment where the child can choose to go to when they feel overwhelmed or they need time and space to regulate. Safe spaces should be readily accessible to the child so they can go safely and independently when they need to. They should be available whenever they're needed by the child for as long as they're needed. And they should be specific to one child. It should be their space that's always available to them and they can choose to go to rather than a shared space. In some classes, you might then need several individual safe spaces for different learners, and it can mean different things in different settings. So obviously with the new design of classrooms, we need to think about that carefully, how we can do that in an appropriate way. It might be a cloth over a table, it might be a pop-up tent, it might be a high-back chair in a quiet area, it can be a spot on the floor, it's whatever's going to work for that learner. But importantly, it's never a place the child's sent to, and it should never have to be earned. It's not something they have to get as a reward. It should be somewhere they go to when they need to. Our sixth key message is plan for movement breaks, and there's further guidance again about these on our website, including we've got a movement breaks guidance for parents to use at home in the parent part of the COVID-19 section in the website. Everybody benefits from physical movement. It makes it easier to focus attention, to be ready to learn and enjoy activities. It reduces feelings of being overwhelmed or overloaded, and movement can be calming or regulating. Some children tend to lose focus when they're still or seated for a period of time, and I'm sure lots of you working at home are finding that. Others may be overstimulated by events and activity, and simply by noises and smells and busyness in the immediate environment. Movement breaks are used to provide sensory input through joints and muscles that's intense enough to calm those children who are overexcited or to alert children who are feeling sleepy, and the same activity can be effective for both. A movement break, sometimes called a sensory break, is a planned activity that's different from what you've just been doing. And they should be predictable and desirable. You should have a clear start and a clear finish. And movement breaks can work best when they're planned at regular intervals across a day. And they can help to regulate a child before a less preferred activity. So just before they're doing something that they're not super enthusiastic about doing, it can maybe help to provide an opportunity to step away from an activity and then return to it, or to support transition between two activities. So for example, if you're doing some maths, take a movement break and then come back to sit to eat your lunch. Movement breaks can meet a range of sensory needs and preferences, and not all are desirable for every child. So knowing what kind of movement a child likes and doesn't like will help you choose the right activities. And if a child's not enjoying an activity or expresses discomfort, stop and don't repeat. Our seventh key message is a very important one. Seek to understand distress behaviour. The mindset with which we view distress behaviour affects how we respond to it. Some distress behaviour in children or young people might be expected, particularly at the moment. These are distressing times, and there might also be some unexpected distress, even when everyone's done their best to prepare and plan. So having an up-to-date knowledge of recent experiences could help us in providing the right support. The signs that a child shows that they might be distressed might have changed over the last few months. Some who previously used some regulation strategies in school might need to relearn these, or may have learned more at home. The child, young person and their family, they may be able to share useful ideas and strategies for avoiding or responding to distress. And there may be sources of distress outside the context where they actually show the distress. And it's important to keep that communication alive between home and school and keep that regular in order to better understand this. So in order to understand distress behaviour, school staff can seek to understand why, think about predictability and desirability, and remember that the last thing that happened might not have been the real or main issue. It might just be the straw that broke the camel's back. Avoid post-match analysis with the child. It's helpful to go away with staff members and reflect, but going over it with the child isn't always helpful. You know yourself, if any of you have become overwhelmed or abused behaviour that we then regret, it's not easy to explain why we actually did it. And make adaptations going forward to avoid the same situation arising again that might result in the same response. A risk assessment might be important, and speaking to staff working in schools and hubs at the moment, or preparing for work in schools and working in the hubs at the moment, I think that really highlighted for us the importance of having the risk assessment. So we've put an autism focused template with reflective questions up on the website to support the risk assessment process. Our final key message is specifically for secondary stage, so 2 key adults. In the often large and complex context of secondary school, it can be difficult for an autistic young person and their parents or carers to know who to contact, and confusing trying to work out what to do if a staff member is unavailable. Therefore, it's recommended that each autistic young person should have 2 consistent key adults, ideally including one from the senior leadership team. And these 2 key adults should act as key contacts and a conduit for communicating with the wider school staff. If a young person needs to seek out support or advice during the school day, they should be prepared as to how to do this and know how to access one or both adults whenever possible. And should one of the adults be absent, the other may be available, making it more likely concerns and incidents are dealt with in a timely manner and things aren't allowed to build up. To support this team approach, any email, written communication or planning meeting should include both key adults. This is particularly important at this time of transition. And before I finish and pass back to Marion, we're going to share the OK Not OK resource with you. So due to COVID-19, there's new guidance in each local authority and new national guidance that's ever evolving. In every education setting, depending on the needs of that community and individuals, the expectations about what's okay and not okay are likely to be new, and they're going to vary between individual learners. So for that reason, we've created a flexible resource, and the intention is that it can be tailored for use according to current guidance, as well as the needs of the individual learner and current expectations. So rather than focusing on what we can no longer do, this offers alternatives and reassurance about things we can do. So if we can't shake our hand with the teacher on the way in every morning anymore, what can we do? It's okay to wave, it's okay to say hello. We're giving alternatives there. And this is a practical resource. We've provided the board, the symbols, the templates of, and guidance on how to use this. And we're really intending that this is for conversation partners, those children who can talk in that back and forth conversation level. You can use this with individuals or small groups, wherever they have that level to understand the language involved and the symbols used to represent this. It's designed to increase predictability and reduce distressed behaviour that arises out of disrupted expectations. You can use it as a sorting task, and then you can put it up on the wall, give clear visual guidance, and be able to reinforce the verbal language. I'll hand you back to Marion, who's going to finish up this part.
It's really important to us that we listen to autistic individuals and their parents, and they should be involved at every stage of planning. So here are some parent quotes from our recent consultation. Oh, next slide, please. Thanks. So first of all, some parents have questions. So this parent's asking, how will changes in school, such as blended learning and social distancing, make sense for safety, enabling learning and well-being, when we think about anxiety, social communication difficulties, and having been out of the school environment for such a long time? And some parents can share what they've learned about their youngsters over this time. This parent says, I've learned that he's very capable, and when he's interested in very capable when he's interested in his schoolwork. He does best in a quiet, calm environment and likes a routine. He hasn't really missed his friends, and in fact his self-sufficiency has been a real strength at this time. He's coped very well and been less anxious than usual. And some parents have advice for staff as well. This parent says, I would like them to understand that because he's self-sufficient, he's not likely to need a lot of emotional support. So lots of time spent asking him how he's feeling in endless surveys will be very boring for him. And finally, here's a reminder of the key messages for support in the return to school. So firstly, ensure adjustments are anticipatory. 2, listen to parents. 3, provide predictability. 4, use visual supports. 5, provide a safe space. 6, plan for movement breaks. 7, seek to understand distress behaviour. And then additionally, at the secondary stage, 2 key adults. Here are some of the references and links that we've mentioned. And here's a list of some of the key new resources that are available on our website. And we now have 50 minutes to answer some of the questions that you've posted. Lorna, would you like to start with the first question?
Yes, I would. Right, so we're pleased to have representation in the audience here today from Scottish Government's Young People's Mental Health team, and they would like to know Is there anything the Scottish Government could do to help support autistic children and young people with their mental health during their transition back into educational settings?
Thanks, that's a big question to start with, but an important one. The NAIT team is a government-funded team, so we have been part of some of the planning groups along with partners. I suppose our key messages are very much designed to support mental health, particularly, for example, taking an anticipatory approach, not waiting until things fall apart, listening to parents, listening to youngsters, and following getting it right for every child, principles and processes for planning. Perhaps using language like distressed behaviour instead of challenging behaviour might be a useful supportive thing to do, and be mindful that perhaps talking therapies might not be the most, might not be the first line of intervention, I suppose. So like that, the last quote that you heard there, for many autistic individuals, adapting the physical and social environment and creating predictability and desirability in the naturally occurring routines and day-to-day life are actually more useful than taking them to do talking therapies or having one-to-one sessions with adults. So it's important to think about those things as well. And in terms of mental health, I guess I think it's a really, really important thing and something that we want to keep on the agenda. And if people have other comments that they want to add in the chat, that'd be really helpful as well.
Okay, we've got a number of questions in the Q&A around the OK, not OK resources. Amanda Mitchell asking if it's available for download. Daniel Ward looking for a copy. Lisa Rendell asking where we get them. They're absolutely downloadable from our website. So thirdspace.scot/NAIT. It will be on the PowerPoint. And if you go to the COVID-19 section, they're in each of the primary and secondary sections. Someone is asking if there is an editable version of this. The license we have through Boardmaker to share their materials is for PDF sharing. So we can't actually, by copyright, share that in an editable form. We have created a number of extra blank boxes that you can fill yourself, or if you happen to have Boardmaker software yourself, you can create your own pictures there to add in. But to be honest, don't get too caught up on them having to match completely. I think if you can create symbols of a similar size with pictures on that will add on to that, then I'm sure that will be acceptable for most young people.
Okay. I've got another question here. Someone's asking, how are allied health professionals communicating with families and schools, and what format are they using? And again, I think this is really topical, something that we're all trying to work out. So lots of NHS staff are using Attend Anywhere, Near Me. Each local health board might have different things that they're doing. Some are using phone calls, some families just prefer that rather than any video format. And I think people are trying really hard to find whatever way is effective for each family. We don't have yet a shared platform across education and health, but it's very much something that people are looking at.
Okay, I'm just going to top up the OK, not OK questions here. We've got a question that's just jumped. Would this be suitable as a whole class activity? Absolutely. It may be that you have some people in your class who developmentally are not at the stage of being able to understand it, but as a generic whole class activity with some differentiation, then yes, absolutely. That's a great thing to do. And then it also helps when you're deciding what goes one side or the other, that you can take a vote where things might cause a little bit of debate. Someone's asked if you happen to know that zones of regulation have proved useful for autistic children. And yes, that's something we're very familiar with, and I think it entirely ties in with what we're talking about today and would be indeed an appropriate resource.
Somebody here has asked, would it be beneficial for autistic learners to go back to having the same support staff as they did last year, or since there has been a break, should they have new support? And I suppose it's not just support staff, it's all staff. For any autistic learner, reducing the number of transitions and changes is helpful, and it might be a time if class teachers and staffing have not yet been set, that it would be helpful to return to somebody that you don't have to build a completely new relationship with. But I think we'll have to bear in mind that even if it is a familiar person, they may still have to rebuild a relationship again.
Okay, there's a question here. Many parents have been commenting on how much calmer their child has been, and the stress of going to school has helped home life. So I'm assuming that's maybe not going to school has helped home life. Is there anything more we can do to encourage children to feel that school is a place they'll want to go back to? I think that's a great question, and I think it's something that is going to come up quite regularly. It's certainly something we're hearing in our consultations. Obviously there'll be a range of family contexts and circumstances, and some parents may be feeling that their child's going to be very reluctant to go back to school, or that they indeed themselves are reluctant to have their child go back, because when they're at home, a lot of the sensory input is removed, and we're certainly hearing that from the young people we're talking to, from some of them, and that ability to choose when you do the work and to have it in chunks with lots of movement in between can be important. And I think the key message, listen to parents, comes in here, and listen to young people who are able to express themselves around their thoughts and needs, and think about, I think there's important learning we can do here from this experience. What is it that has made that a calming and successful period for their child? And what elements of that actually are portable and transferable back to the school setting? And I think we've really tried to focus on that in our parent and carer and young person's views form on our website. So we've got some guidance there on having these conversations with families, really trying to dig down into that. What are the elements that work for that individual child? And then are there ways we can bring that back? Actually, some of it will happen naturally. I think there's going to be fewer children in each class for starters. There are going to be less things in the room. And for years, we've been saying to people, declutter your classroom and make it a clear environment. Well, that's kind of being forced upon us now. So there will be elements that will naturally lend themselves to a calmer state. And there will be a lot more structure and routine and predictability, because things will have to be very carefully planned. But ultimately, listen, find out what works for that individual and do your very best to incorporate that in.
Lorna, there's a question here from a parent who's saying that her daughter is 13 and going into S3, and she's not really coped well with engaging with the online learning for her classes over this time. She's been engaging with classes from her additional support needs classes. I'm worried that she'll be far behind her peers, and will she get support to catch up with mainstream classes, or will she have to do more in the support structure?
Okay, and I think we can all education professionals and people working in schools really are thinking that we can't make an assumption that all children are coming back at the level they were at before, or having progressed on at the same pace and stage. But in Scottish education, we have, as we say, 25% of any school and class generally would have an additional support need. So there's differentiation happening there. We're meeting a range of needs, and teachers are very skilled at assessing and working out where children are and where they need to go. So it's unlikely there would be an assumption that everybody's coming back at the same stage or at a particular stage. I think there will be, certainly from what we're hearing from local authorities, a focus on health and well-being in the initial stages in terms of curriculum, and that gradually, as the children become comfortable with the routines, we'll be thinking more about working out where people are and going from where they're at. And again, it comes back to that consultation, that listening very carefully to families and working out what has their home experience been like. Have they been learning lots about one particular area and not other areas? Have they not been able to engage at all? Have they stormed ahead in particular sections? And as I say, I think teachers are very skilled and experienced at working out where people are and where they need to go next.
Okay, there's another question about whether it would be beneficial for teachers or school staff to prepare some sort of questionnaire for parents before returning back to school to understand their thoughts and feelings fully, as there will be many changes for the young people. So you might be glad to hear that we have done something. You can obviously adapt it if it doesn't quite fit your needs, but there is an information sharing guidance, and there's a form that you could use with the parent, and there's also one for autistic individuals, perhaps for teenagers who might them have their own information to share. So I hope that's helpful.
Quite a few questions coming in around the theme of safe spaces and the link to soft furnishings. And I think, you know, again, government are giving guidance to local authorities. Local authorities are then building their own guidance and information for schools, and individual schools will need to make their own decisions in terms of day-to-day decisions. And it would be wrong for us to give a blanket message here. You have to work within the guidance you've got, and if the guidance is that soft furnishing isn't a thing, well, that's not a thing, and we work around that. We find whatever furniture we have that a child would cope with. Don't get too worried about the safe space. It can be a wipeable thing. It can be a tent that's easy cleaned. It can be a plastic mat on the floor that you sit on. It's more about making sure that there's a space there that the child feels comfortable with, that they can go to at a point when they need to, and that it's always available to them. If it doesn't involve soft furnishing, that's absolutely fine. It could be a hard chair in the corner for some children, that's absolutely okay, or a rubber move and sit cushion will give them the softness that they needed. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
And then there's a question, I think again this is a theme that amongst a few people, if an individual's unable to comply with new guidelines, what should we do? And although we can't give you a definitive answer, and we would refer you back to your local guidelines and your school guidelines, essentially we have to work within the Equality Act and make reasonable adjustments. So just as we wouldn't expect, you know, 2-year-olds to understand physical distancing and keep away from other people, and there are talk of different kinds of approaches to that, whether it's bubbles or different creative ways of thinking about how we manage it. But essentially we have to think about what the individual is able to do, take account of their disability and make reasonable adjustments. And I think that there will be a lot of planning and preparation and discussion required, because it's very much related to the individual and the context.
Sorry. Somebody has said, you mentioned post-match analysis is not the best thing for an autistic child, and they completely agree. Is there a resource or activity that you would suggest to use instead of a chat for after a distressed incident? And I think because we're packing a lot into the 20 minutes here, we didn't really get a chance to explain ourselves in maybe the detail that we might in another context, but that's helpful to know that we need to be clearer about that. We're essentially saying any post-match analysis would be unhelpful. So it's not necessarily about whether you use words or whether you use a written resource or a sorting task or whatever. It's actually asking the child to reflect on their behaviour that would perhaps be unhelpful. And I think what we're kind of accepting is that, or the premise we're basing that on, is that the child doesn't enjoy feeling as out of control as that and displaying that behaviour. That's a point when they've really lost control and they're feeling overwhelming distress. And I think it's best to park that and to go in the next day with a fresh day, and as staff to reflect, gosh, what were the things building up to that? How did the child get to the stage where that was able to tip over into that level of distress? And what can we change about that child's physical and social environment in order to prevent that happening again? I think if you identify that there was a disrupted expectation or an area of learning that the child's at a developmental stage that they could cope with that's helpful, then you address that at a much later time in a much later way without any reference to the incident that you've identified. This child doesn't understand that particular terminology you used that was a trigger, so I'm going to find a way in a couple of weeks to sit down and do a lesson with the class on terminology around blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is that has caused the issue.
Okay, there's another question about how would you suggest introducing children to their new classroom when coming back to school? Are there any videos that show children why things look different just now? So I don't know, Lorna, do you want to take that one, or will I answer that one?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Okay.
I think, well, certainly through our resources, we're recommending photographs and videos of your environment. I think if you were to look at generic ones, for most autistic people, that wouldn't be effective because they would tend to be quite specific and may indeed just expect it to look exactly like the video you've just shown them. So I think the important thing is not to use generic visual resources to explain that sort of thing. If you can, take photographs of the environment the child's going to go to, or create a video tour of what they're going to see. That's fantastic because it's relevant and it's specifically what they're going to see. But it's really important not to confuse by introducing more generic things that show things that won't actually be, even though we think the main things are the same, they might focus in on small bits of detail and then have disrupted expectation. And we come back to that disrupted expectation being a source of distress behaviour and anxiety.
And a couple of more points I had in relation to that. For some individuals, so maybe at the social partner level or who've got a certain learning style, they may actually need to physically walk around a building to see the changes. And because of not having been at school for a long time, they may need to one day take a walk past the school, the next day come to the entrance, the next day go into the room and so on. And it would be great if they could see that before they themselves then actually have to go in for the whole day. So there might, that kind of individualised preparation might be helpful for some youngsters. And then another thing that we've been thinking about is a kind of same different type sorting task. So say it's, lots of kids might have been in hub schools where you've not had the same structure and routine. Perhaps you've been outside, been able to go outside whenever you want and all that stuff, and then you're coming back to school that's got different rules. So perhaps for individuals who can visualise that, seeing what the differences are and talking about that might be something that's helpful as well.
Yeah, and actually that answers a question from earlier about how you prepare children. Someone has mentioned children who've been in a hub school where there's just one or two children in a class coming back to a much larger class, and how do we prepare around that? And I think we're giving some thought to that at the moment. Watch out on the website, we'll do our best to get something up there that captures that same and different between hub school and home. We're carrying out consultations with people at the moment just to check that we're getting the real examples of what we should include in that for sorting. I've got another question here, just probably to finish off, that's us hitting time. Any examples of good movement breaks which could be implemented into practice, keeping in mind social distancing, or other examples online? Again, just to flag to our resources online, there's a movement breaks guidance on there, and there's a movement breaks at home guidance on there. And you can, within that, it describes particular movement breaks that can be carried out. And that was written in partnership with occupational therapy colleagues who have also put some work on the autism toolbox. So another good place to look around information on sensory and movement breaks.
And I would just add, we haven't really had much time to talk about partnership working, but I think that's where to go, I suppose. If you want to get ideas about an individual, your local occupational therapy team would be the people with the expertise in that area. And likewise, if you're thinking about communication supports, looking at ways to, perhaps new ways how we can work collaboratively across health and education, I think will be really important in the next few weeks.
So I think that's our time come to an end. That's us at the end of the NAIT webinar. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Please visit our website for resources. Follow us on Twitter if you're not already for updates. We will go through the chat and the Q&A and look for other things we've missed, and we'll certainly try to capture anything in the resources we create going forward and the information we put out there that tries to answer as much of what you've raised as we possibly can. We hope the next few months go very well for you and for the children and young people and their families. Best of luck and keep safe.